Hey everybody, I just finished listening to Pride and Prejudice, and I liked it so much that I couldn't help but draw pretty much every major character in my own style while I was listening to it, and I figured it would be fun to go through each of them and explain why I thought they looked the way that they did. So we're going to start with Lizzie. We'll be jumping around a bit later, but for now let's ground ourselves with her. Is it boring to say she's my favorite character? She's great. I wanted to capture some of that boisterousness, that sort of self-assuredness she carries with her, so it was always the plan to dress her in red, a very bright, passionate color. And I ultimately decided to make her blonde as well, because I thought, likewise, the lighter hair color would be more striking. It also just kind of ended up suiting the color palette better, especially when contrasting Darcy, who we will be getting to a bit down the line. Now, I wanted to also capture a bit of her bashfulness. She's always just embarrassed of her family, embarrassed of her own conduct, embarrassed of other people. Everything seems to embarrass her. Very relatable. But for now, we're going to move on to Mr. Bennet, and he was also kind of difficult to nail down because I wanted to capture both his eccentricity and weirdness, but also how grounded and calm he typically is. At this point, I was drawing him in the scene where he calls in Lizzie to talk about the would-be engagement with Mr. Collins, and he looks completely unbothered. I, however, was not completely unbothered working on Elizabeth's hair. It took me a while to figure out what exactly I wanted to go with. I tried some pretty wild stuff before settling on a more conservative kind of look. I really do like the little wavy parts she's got in front, though. I kept the dress pretty simple. I didn't really want the focus to necessarily be on capturing accurate British 19th century formal attire. It was more about letting the personalities shine through, and for Elizabeth, that mostly meant a more reserved kind of dress. It is, again, going to be a nice bright red, but really the outfits are only the focus if the characters are supposed to be dressed extravagantly, and Elizabeth, not really. Similar story for her father, although this is probably even less period appropriate. I just wanted to give him that kind of salaryman look, kind of vaguely dilfish, if I might venture. Now for the coloring, I'll admit I took some serious liberties, particularly with the eyes. I've seen some depictions of Elizabeth with blonde hair, but she is explicitly said to have dark eyes in the book. I interpret that metaphorically, I suppose. Whatever, I like how the blue looks, and I think it gives her a very piercing glare, which is more the focus, that the eyes are striking somehow, than them necessarily being exactly the way the book describes. Although, in fairness, the book does not give a color, and maybe if you squint hard enough, blue can still be dark. Probably not. Moving on to Jane for a bit, her main feature that I had in mind, as crass as this may sound, was big naturals. She is described as larger than Elizabeth and less suited to physical exercise like walking, and that to me meant boobs. She's also described as very naturally pretty, so I figured just having her be thin but like well endowed kind of made sense for that. On a less inappropriate note, I made her colored green because that's a very serene, calm color, and she's a very serene, calm character for the most part. I gave her this very cute pose. She's so happy, so affectionate. Really, who doesn't love Jane? Even in her own book, who doesn't love Jane? I heard so much about her before I started reading that I initially thought that she was the main character, which I think is the intention. I'm making some slight adjustments to Mr. Bennet here. I changed the mustache a very tiny bit. But just as quickly, we are back to Jane. I gave her hazel eyes. I wanted that kind of range of green. Maybe I could venture a little into brown if I wanted to, but still have blue for all the sisters. It was a little hard to find ways to make every one of them visually distinct, given that there are 5 of them, but these first 2 came out very nice, and I was a lot less restricted with them, which is good, because they're the 2 most important siblings in the family. In general, I tried to pay attention to making sure there was at least some resemblance between every child and either the mother or the father. I typically pulled the skin tones from one of the 2 for all of them, the hair colors, the eye colors. They're not identical, but they're supposed to be comparable enough at the very least. And what you might find interesting is, in the case of Elizabeth, I actually have her eye and hair color resemble her mother. And this is for 2 reasons. The first is because I do think they both actually have quite a bit in common, especially in terms of their unwitting attraction of not necessarily wanted attention, but also because, in a lot of ways, I think that Mrs. Bennet is everything Elizabeth does not want to become. and because of that, it is very funny how embarrassed she gets at bearing any resemblance to her. So just to torture Elizabeth a little more, let's make her look like her mom. So another funny thing to note is I drew Elizabeth in this bashful pose before I'd even read the scene I ended up alluding to with the dialogue, and it just fits so perfectly that I felt like I had to. She's so cute. And it was around this time that I realized I was going to be drawing a lot of these characters. I thought maybe I'd stop after You-Know-Who came next, but I at the very least did have to draw You-Know-Who. That being, of course, Darcy. And he is as handsome as ever, I am proud to say. I felt like he came together pretty intuitively, partially because I just kind of designed him to be, in a lot of ways, visually Elizabeth's opposite. He still has those very striking eyes, but his are a lot smaller. They're similar in color, actually, just because I made his main color blue to contrast her red, and also to emphasize his cool-headedness. And while I was at it, I figured it wouldn't hurt to draw his sister, Georgiana. And I love her. I love how Darcy's standoffishness with her is more just pure shyness, and it does help recontextualize her brother's actions because I think a lot of them are also inspired by shyness. Hell, he kind of admits it at times, and Elizabeth brushes it off as more arrogance. Very cute. The emphasis I placed on blue wasn't just to emphasize how cool and more sullen and contemplative the Darcys are, but also to emphasize their status, because blue is typically associated with royalty in a lot of respects, blue blood and all that. Some other features of note are I give Darcy a very manly nose and jawline, and I make his sister very pale. She's a nervous little thing. Touch up Elizabeth's hair a little before moving on to everybody's favorite bachelor, Mr. Bingley. Yeah, who doesn't love Bingley? He's so fun. I kind of have a default cute happy-go-lucky guy design that I pull out whenever I draw characters like this, and I kind of like keeping that consistent. I'm mostly emphasizing his fun-loving nature, his kindness and approachability. He's got very soft, friendly eyes, very bouncy hair. This is more of a personal thing for me, but I have a lot of characters that look the way I drew Bingley, but for me that meant it fit his easygoing nature by giving him a very easy-to-put-together design for me. That's not going to resonate with everybody, but I like to think that his design is pretty simple and inviting, just as he is. And it definitely contrasts his friend Darcy quite well, especially with the much larger pupils. It also kind of resembles his sister, Miss Bingley. She is decidedly less pleasant of a character, but her design I wanted to be visually appealing because part of the charm of Darcy's affections toward Elizabeth is that they are completely unswayed by her, and I thought a good way to emphasize that would be by making her legitimately very pretty. It's not that she's not attractive enough for him, it's not that she's not amiable enough to him at least. She's just not Elizabeth, and she never will be. But she is very pretty, she's got very striking, almost reddish eyes, and a very red color palette to kind of compete with Elizabeth, so to speak. And now Wiggum. The dirty bum. I basically just gave him a white t-shirt. He doesn't deserve more than that, and he can't afford more than it either. I give him a kind of ruggedly handsome look, enough that I could see Elizabeth being interested in him, but still looking kind of like the bum that he is. Can't be bothered to even shave properly. I see him as kind of a parallel of Mr. Collins, where Mr. Collins' flattery completely falls short on wooing Elizabeth. Wiggum has some more success at first. And, of course, we have the lovely Mrs. Wiggum, otherwise known as Lydia. This is where I really buckled down and drew the rest of the Bennet siblings. The 5 sisters are very fun and all in their own respects, but Lydia is probably my least favorite just because of the insane amount of problems she causes through her incompetence. She's pretty cute, though. I wanted to make her pretty cute. I gave her freckles, which Elizabeth also has, but I think I make them more pronounced on Lydia. And despite resembling her mother very closely in personality, I give her her own look with kind of wilder hair, more dirty blonde. And then I just do a few small touch-ups to Elizabeth's hair, her mother's hair, and I add Lydia's freckles. They talk a lot in the book about how unpleasant Lydia is, but there is definitely a more unpleasant character, and that would be Mr. Collins. He is just the worst, and it's fun to have a character like him around just as a frame of reference for everybody else, but my god is he insufferable. So I tried to make him look insufferable. I gave him a big nose, crooked teeth, balding head, just as unattractive as a guy could get, while also having this air of superiority that he carries with him at all times for no reason. Meanwhile, I also turn up the saturation a bit on Bingley's skin tone, and I touch up Elizabeth's hair a little. as well as her mom's. Love the Marge Simpson hair, very melodramatic. Next we have Kitty, and this one was actually very fun. I wanted to give her a sort of cat-like appearance, so she's got that sort of cat mouth and almost cat ears in her hairstyle. Besides her being as playful and fun as Lydia is, there isn't a ton to talk about regarding her personality. She's typically a package deal with Lydia, and the most interesting stuff she gets to do is when Lydia does something on her own, forcing her to be the silly one of the household. Now apparently she learns from the example of her older sisters by the end of the book, but I'm still a little skeptical. She's a little doofus, and I love her. I give her kind of darker hair, more yellowish sort of skin. Honestly, her color palette isn't really the most exciting thing. Again, I don't have a ton to work with, but vaguely cat-like. Mary was fun. My idea in my head was Velma from Scooby-Doo. Kind of nerdy, bookish, disinterested in all the world, mildly sassy. I like her well enough, but not the most attended to character in the book. Her one truly unique design feature I give her is glasses, because, again, she is very studious and very nerdy. And mean as it may sound, she is noted to be less attractive than her sisters, so I did make a point of that. Speaking of unattractive, hi Lady Catherine. I initially wanted to make her design way more extravagant than I ended up going, but she's got that air of condescension about her, where she's pretending to be stooping to your level, while always reigning supreme over everybody. And I think I managed to strike a pretty good balance there. She's got purple, another color associated with royalty. And finally we have the Gardeners. Not the most relevant characters, but they certainly have their place. Mr. Gardner I gave a kind of green, almost like swampy color palette because he's all about fishing. Made him try to look very friendly and chill. And Mrs. Gardner I made more pinkish, purplish, reddish for her color palette because she is very involved in Elizabeth's romantic pursuits. And I generally just wanted both of them to look very kindly and friendly. Now, initially the plan was to end on this kind of anticlimactic note with the Gardeners, but upon further consideration there was one more change I wanted to make to Elizabeth, and that being some sort of attempt at preserving the dark eyes thing. So I made them darker. And with that, I believe we are done. So, thank you very much for watching. If you liked the video, maybe leave it a little like, maybe even give it a comment, maybe even hit the subscribe button. If you're feeling really daring, maybe even hit the bell. And I'll see you next time.